Hello and welcome back to another episode of What's in the Word with evangelist Kevin Wagner and myself, Joshua Wagner, and we are today in Acts chapter 25. Paul has been before Governor Felix and then now has spent 2 years in prison. And now, as we're going to see, there is a new governor over Caesarea, a man named Festus. So Felix, then Festus.
Alphabetical.
That's right. And so, Dad, to begin, why don't you read for us the first 5 verses?
3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They urgently requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me and press charges against the man there, if he has done anything wrong."
So what we see is, once again, 2 years later, those same Jews who made the vow under Felix and were planning as well to wait in hiding during Paul's transfer to kill Paul, and of course they couldn't because this plot was found out and there was ample military guard. These guys are still wanting to kill Paul. 2 years later, he's still been in prison, and now they still want to kill him. And Festus, once again, maybe aware of the previous plot, says, you know what, rather than him come to me, I'm actually heading that way anyways. And so I'll just see him, and why don't some of you guys come with me? So again, their plan is backfiring, and we can see what's happening. Dad, why don't you now read verses 6 through 8?
After spending 8 or 10 days with them, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul appeared, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Then Paul made his defense. "I have done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar." So,
once again, they're providing false accusations of which they have no evidence. And Festus says, okay, Paul, what do you say? And Paul's defense is very simple. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews. I've done nothing wrong against the temple. So anything having to do with Judaism, he is free and innocent. And then I have also done nothing wrong against Caesar, which is really the part that would concern Festus, okay? And then what we see is Festus now's his response to the Apostle Paul. So Dad, why don't you read now verses 9 through 12.
Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul answered, "I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You have appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you will go."
So Festus's compromise to placate to the Jews was, let's just send you back to Jerusalem. Now, had he done that, very likely Paul would have been killed along the way, because that was their plot all along. And Paul, probably knowing this, wisely says, you know, listen, I've done nothing wrong against the Jews. I don't need to stand trial in Jerusalem. And you're a Roman, and I'm a Roman. I'm a Roman citizen. I know my rights. And so I don't want to go to Jerusalem, probably because he knew to some extent that he could die for it. And so what does he do? He says, well, I appeal to Caesar. And Festus is probably surprised, because an appeal to Caesar did not usually end well. But here this man has appealed to Caesar, and it's sort of almost like this movie line, you know.
It is.
And you can see Festus, his response to Paul: "You have appealed to Caesar you will go."
Yeah.
You know, anything that you think about when you think about that Caesar
it's just
appeal?
really dramatic, you know, like it is. It's like a movie line. Like, I appeal to Caesar, and then you have appealed to Caesar you will go. It's just really filled with drama.
And this, you know, in many ways, we believe was the plan of God.
Amen.
That God wanted to get Paul to the most powerful person on the planet, which was Caesar. And Paul eventually does end up in Rome, and we believe did preach the gospel even to Caesar's court. And so, you know, who knows what wonderful things may have come about from that. We do not have biblical recordings of that encounter, but
we know that he talks in Philippians about how the whole palace guard, Caesar's whole palace guard, was aware of the gospel, and obviously God was planting significant seeds in the higher echelon of the Roman people.
And we do recognize the awesome work that Paul did even in Rome at the very end of his life. Dad, let's now read verses 13 through 15.
A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, "There is a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned."
Okay, so we are introduced now to another person of political authority. This is King Herod Agrippa. Now, remember the dynamics of what you've got going on here in Israel at this time. This is a Roman-ruled area, the province of Judea. And over the province of Judea there is the governor, Roman governor, Festus, who is the political authority and instituting Roman rule and reign there in the Holy Land. But you also do, and the Romans were strategic in not wanting to create such upheaval and such rebellion among the Jews, that they still allowed for the Jews to have a lot of autonomy within Judea. Among the, part of that autonomy was King Herod Agrippa. These Herods that we do see during the time of Jesus are kings and people in authority who were over the Jewish people. So Herod Agrippa is a Jew himself, and he is subservient to Festus, but is over the Jewish people. And so he has some authority here. And Festus basically asked King Agrippa his advice on what to do regarding Paul.
Right.
Okay. And then, so now let's read verses 16 through 22.
I told him that it is not the Roman custom to hand over any man before he has faced his accusers and has had an opportunity to defend himself against their charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes they had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters, so I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on those charges. When Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear this man myself." He replied, "Tomorrow you will hear him."
Okay, so Festus gives a bit of a recap of the trial of Paul, the circumstances surrounding Paul's imprisonment, what he knows about this situation. And Dad, the thing that really stands out to me when Festus is recounting this is, he says, when his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Yeah. Like, he sort of was, boy, you guys really hate this guy. He must have done some awful stuff. And then, actually, the things that they say, that they claim that he's done that are so wrong, some points of dispute about their own religion, but mainly about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive.
That's right.
And, you almost sense some skepticism within Festus. Like, is Paul like all there? Is he a crazy person? He's talking about some dead man who he thinks is alive and all this stuff. But, I love it because it is just, that's the gospel. Like, that's what we all believe. Like, we just are here talking about a dead man who we claim now is alive. It's the resurrection. The
resurrection is the most important event in human history.
That's right.
And it's also the most historically attested event in ancient history. And it's also obviously what Paul preached about the most. because that's the one thing that's defining all of Paul's preaching for the Jewish people, and that's what they're telling, Festus about.
And these guys who are bringing these charges against Paul, they were all there when Jesus likely was crucified. They were part of this thing. They know where the empty tomb is, and they know that they can't provide the body and the bones of Jesus. Like, the stuff that Paul's claiming, they were eyewitnesses to, and yet they have no proof because, of course, the tomb is empty and the body is gone. He is not here.
Amen.
He is risen. And so he gives Festus gives this recap to Agrippa, and Agrippa is intrigued. I would like to hear this man myself. And tomorrow, he says, you will hear him. Dad, why don't we just begin Paul's appearance now before Agrippa, finishing chapter 25, and then chapter 26 will go into a lot of the encounter that Paul has with Agrippa, and this sort of sets up that story. So verse 23 through 27.
The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking officers and the leading men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man. The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought to not to live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send on a prisoner without specifying the charges against him.
So in some ways here, Festus is really trying to shirk the responsibility off of himself and onto Agrippa. He's asking for help. I don't know what I'm supposed to tell Caesar about why this guy is coming. There's no specific charges.
Well, and in verse 20 it says, Festus says, I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. And the thing is, he's a Roman. He doesn't understand all these Jewish intricacies. So having Herod there, even though Herod was really a failed Jew, he wasn't a religious observant Jew, but he was hoping that Agrippa, at least because he had Jewish background, could understand more than he could. It's like, King Herod, help a guy out here, because I got no idea what to do.
That's right. And next time, what we're going to see is the audience that Paul then has with King Agrippa, his wife Bernice, Festus present as well, and these other Jews, and another powerful sermon, one of many that Paul gives throughout the book of Acts. And so this has set the stage of introducing new characters into the story, showing us the perspective that Festus had, recognizing his own inadequacies and then his need for help from King Agrippa. And really what's so cool about this is time and time again, God putting Paul before people of authority and allowing him to share the gospel to the most important and significant people within the world at the time. And we believe that God wants to continue to do that. He wants to continue to put his people before kings and prime ministers and presidents and people of authority, and that when we get there, that we would be bold like Paul, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and recognizing that the platform we're given is ultimately to serve God's kingdom and expand it. And so we thank God for the example set forth by the Apostle Paul here in Acts chapter 25. And that is what's in the Word.